Coming up, sadly, it's now a lost art, but we've all been there. That moment when your favorite band announced their new album and you could practically feel the electricity in the air. I mean, remember when that anticipation built for like months, sometimes even years? You're counting down the days and then finally the album drops and you hate it. You can't believe what you're listening to, and you can't even force yourself to finish the record. We've all been there. Well, today we're diving into some of rock's most crushing letdowns, those highly anticipated albums and songs that fell flat and made you want to get your money back even. You'll hear the story of the number 2 hit that a top producer wrote for one of rock's best vocalists, but it made her actually want to gag. She reluctantly recorded it, but later refused to sing it again. Also, there's the album that was hyped up for the better part of 2 decades, and it cost $13 million to make it, and turned out to be one of the biggest flops of all time. It went through 10 different guitarists in the process, including 2 of the best ever. Plus, the band who sued their fans and made a list of 335,000 fans they wanted to punish for downloading their new song without permission. And then there was the album that was actually a pretty big hit, but the band hated it. So much that they've essentially erased it from their history. Get ready for some good stories from some bad albums coming up next on Professor Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember this.
Storytelling Band. Now available at stores everywhere.
You're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now to be a part of our Music History Daily, straight from the artists, and make sure to check out our podcasts on Apple and Spotify. All right, so for today's episode, I wanted to count down 7 of the most disappointing releases in rock history. And actually, we're going to have a lot of fun with this. I mean, actually, I've got, 5 albums and a couple of songs that we all could not wait to hear. Some of these were hyped for months or even years. But then when they finally went public, fans, we were all asking ourselves, what the hell was that? What happened? And these are all bands and artists I love. But you know what? Even the best of them can get it wrong sometimes. We all make mistakes. I've made plenty of them in the last few months here on this channel with a few bombs myself. But these are the releases that bombed, backfired, and maybe even made us question our faith in some of our favorite bands, even for a second. The songs that we love to hate or hated to love. Starting things off at number 7, I've got an album from Fleetwood Mac that most people probably don't think about at all. From 1990, I've got Behind the Mask. You know, since the 70s, the Mac had ruled the album charts and done really well on the Billboard Hot 100. Between the formation of the classic lineup of Mic Fleetwood, Christine and John McVie, Stevie Nicks, and Lindsay Buckingham, the band's run up to the 90s was pretty perfect. They'd scored 3 number 1 LPs, a top 5, a top 10, at least 75 million albums sold by that point worldwide, and 16 top 20 singles on the Hot 100. Legendary run, right? So why would the 90s be any different?
Till the landslide brought me down. Go away, when the rain washes you clean, you'll know.
Here's the thing. For the first time since 1975, the classic Fleetwood Mac was officially no longer in play. 1987's Tango in the Night had been yet another monster hit for the band. It reached number 7 in the US, and it spawned hit singles like Big Love and Little Lies and Everywhere. I mean, the band was riding high, or at least they should have been. But if you know anything about Fleetwood Mac, you know that there was always drama brewing behind the scenes. So this time around, Lindsay Buckingham, the band's musical architect and creative perfectionist, said he was done with touring. He needed a break. I guess that's tame by Fleetwood Mac standards. But the rest of the band, they didn't take it well. Said Mick, and I quote, "Lindsay didn't want to go out on the road, and we knew that, and he kept putting us off. We said, you out of anyone with the amount of work you put into this album and you're not going to go out on the road? I mean, that's crazy. You want to piss this thing down the drain?" But that's how it was. Lindsay Buckingham was out. And so after their 1988 tour had already been scheduled, the remaining members of Fleetwood Mac had to scramble to replace him. So 2 new guitarists would enter the fray. Billy Burnett from Mick's side project The Zoo, and a guy named Rick Vito, a seasoned pro from Bob Seger's band. They tested the new 6-piece lineup on the Tango tour, and surprisingly it worked. It worked really well. The optimism was real. This new creative dynamic felt refreshing after years of Lindsay Buckingham's control. Stevie Nicks noted how much easier the recording process was, saying, "It's not that we didn't take as much time, it's more that the time that we did take was quality time." When has anyone from Fleetwood Mac ever said something like that? There were no serious arguments. There was no drama. It's just musicians making music together. Now, one side note, Lindsay did make one brief appearance on the record. He played acoustic guitar on the title track, but that was it. So you'd think without any drama and the ease of making music that the album would be a smash, right? Right? Wrong. When Behind the Mask hit stores on April 10th, 1990, it became clear that sometimes you don't know what you got till it's gone. Cinderella knows that. Here in the US, there wasn't much of an appetite at all for this record. The album stalled out at number 18. Considering their string of top 10 albums, that was a major disappointment. The lead single, Save Me, that peaked to the lackluster number 33. The album's other three singles did even worse. They didn't even break into the Hot 100. There was some success on the rock charts, a little bit, but this was the first time that mainstream listeners had decided to take a hard pass on Fleetwood Mac. The problem was obvious to anyone paying attention. This album lacked Lindsay Buckingham's innovative edge. And yes, the dysfunctional drama that seemed to fuel their best material. What the world got instead was a safe adult contemporary rock album. Nobody wants that from Fleetwood Mac. The cold reception was the writing on the wall. This six-piece lineup would be short-lived. After touring the record, both Stevie Nicks and Rick Vito split, leaving the band in flux in the 90s. Although if you've kept up on your Fleetwood Mac history, you know there would be plenty more highs and lows to come as it goes. All right, coming in at number 6, I've got Eagles with Hole in the World. There's a hole in the world tonight. First of all, it's a bigger risk to cover this band anytime, for obvious reasons, right? And Don Henley is not going to be happy about what I'm going to say here, but I got to say it's the truth. From their country rock beginnings to Take It Easy in the early 70s to the 1980 single, I Can't Tell You Why, Eagles, they'd racked up 13 top 20 hits on the Hot 100. Easy, take it easy. Don't can't tell you why. And they had number one hits like One of These Nights, and New Kid in Town, Hotel California, and Heartache Tonight. One of these days, the new kid in town. Welcome to the Hotel California. And I'm just scratching the surface here when it comes to Eagles classics. They had so many. But I gotta be honest, Hole in the World was not one of them. The band's breakup in 1980, that was hard enough on fans. Many couldn't believe that it was the end of an era. But the 14 years of the world had to wait for the Hell Freezes Over reunion. That was even worse. When they did finally come back together, it was just fabulous to finally get some new material. Get Over It was great. Love Will Keep Us Alive, Learn to Be Still. They were all charting singles in the 90s in the middle of grunge. Good songs that got us pumped up. But then it was radio silence all over again. Now, by the end of the 90s, it had been over 20 years since they'd released a full studio album of original songs. And we the fans, I think all of us, I can speak for all of us, we were anxious for whatever we could get from them. After the tragic events of September 11, 2001, it seemed like the fans would get something there. The same day the band was scheduled to go into the recording studio to begin work on their first album of new material in decades. A lot of people don't know that. They were scheduled to go in the studio that very day. But instead, as America reeled from the terrorist attacks, Don Henley sat at his piano and began crafting what would become the band's musical response to the national tragedy. He wrote in the liner notes, "I sat down at the piano in my home studio and started putting some chords with the phrase Hole in the World." It's actually a song that would be good for right now, that title at least. The song's scope and intent later expanded as the War on Terror began. As time passed, anticipation continued to grow for the song, which Glenn Frey called a classic Eagles record. Big mistake when you call it that before it comes out. As the years dragged on, there was no song and no new album. It was until July of 2003 that we got one of them, Hole in the World. However, the response was sadly pretty underwhelming. It wasn't much of a payoff for the nearly decade-wait fans endured between singles. The band slapped Hole in the World on their 2003 The Very Best Of album, making it their closing track. And not so sure it belongs on the Greatest Hits album at all, and neither did a lot of fans. Hole in the World peaked at number 69 on the Billboard Hot 100. And this was a serious letdown. The song did go to number 5 on the adult contemporary chart. Like, come on, this is the Eagles we're talking about, one of the biggest bands in the world. They live by high standards, and this was a commercial failure compared to that. When measured against legendary tracks like Hotel California or Take It Easy, I mean, Hole in the World, it just feels bland. It feels very vanilla, right?
Check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. The sound of your own wheels drive you crazy. They say that love is just a state of mind.
I mean, I'm just being honest here. I know a certain member of that band may come after me for saying it or for even talking about this song or the band in general, but you know, we the fans, we just came to expect a lot more. After such a long wait, Hole in the World, we were just kind of like, really? It would be another 4 years after that before they finally released their 7th studio album, the sprawling double LP called Long Road Out of Eden. Not surprisingly, it did go to number 1. And Hole in the World, you can actually find that on the Deluxe Collector's Edition if you're curious at all. Though, again, let down. All right, coming in at number 5, I've got the Red Hot Chili Peppers and their 6th studio album, One Hot Minute, which actually has my favorite Chili Pepper song ever on it, My Friends. I think it's a classic. Do you guys remember the story at all? Okay, so by the early 90s, the Red Hot Chili Peppers had evolved from Los Angeles punk-funk misfits into one of rock's most promising acts. And that's thanks in part to 1991's Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic. Built on the mega success of the number 2 hit, Under the Bridge. This generational album sold over 14 million copies worldwide and transformed the band into international superstars. In addition to Under the Bridge and Give It Away, you know, that dominated MTV and radio, and Breaking the Girl reached number 15 on the rock charts. This was a massive album. But success came with a price. Guitarist John Frusciante. He was overwhelmed by the band's sudden fame, and he abruptly quit in 1992, leaving his bandmates scrambling for a replacement. Enter Dave Navarro, guitarist from Jane's Addiction, one of LA's most officially critically adored bands. On paper, it was a dream merger, right? 2 iconic LA acts joining forces to create what one observer called a mutant robot. It promised a powerful new creative direction for the band. But the recording process itself was plagued by personal demons. Kiedis relapsed into his addiction after a dental procedure got him high, and prolonged the sessions and infused the lyrics with dark melancholy themes. Navarro, too, was grappling with his own drug issues and past trauma. That created a toxic environment in the studio. Navarro's musical influences were also vastly different from Frusciante's. Where John brought melody and funk rock chemistry, Dave Navarro was drawn to heavy metal and psychedelic darkness, if you will. This pushed the band's sound into uncharted territory, which alienated fans who were expecting a sequel to Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic. Meanwhile, the anticipation for One Hot Minute was immense. 4 years would pass between the albums. Fans were chomping at the bit. They were eager to hear what this supergroup collaboration was going to produce. But what emerged on September 12, 1995 wasn't what anyone was expecting at all. Now, One Hot Minute did debut at number 4 on the Billboard 200. Not bad. It won double platinum overall, but it sold 10 million less or more than its predecessor. And the album did not really produce as many hits. It did produce Warped, that hit number 7 on the modern rock charts. My Friends actually spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the rock charts, and Aeroplane reached number 8. But the vibe, it was just completely different. It was heavy and tortured, and ultimately Navarro's tenure, it proved short-lived. Creative differences and ongoing drug problems led to his dismissal in 1998. And this was when John rejoined for 1999's Californication. The band basically erased One Hot Minute from their legacy, though. They've rarely performed his songs live, and said drummer Chad Smith, and I quote, "We don't really feel connected to that record anymore. And aside from the occasional airing of My Friends, most of these tracks stay packed away in the attic, since they're a reminder of a season that they'd rather leave behind." It's just a strange thing when the band, they pretty much act like that record never happened.
I love all of you.
Coming in at number 4, this one's more about the song than the album, but it's also about the album. It's Heart's All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You from Brigade. Now, by 1990, Heart was already a rock institution. I mean, Ann and Nancy Wilson had risen through the changing tides of the 70s and the 80s to become one of classic rock's greatest bands. Early albums like Dreamboat Annie and Little Queen showcased a band that could blend Zeppelin-inspired hard rock with gorgeous harmonies and acoustic textures. Nobody sounded like Heart. After a commercial lull in the early 80s, though, Heart fired back with 2 multi-platinum LPs and 6 top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100. They proved themselves with, Heart's self-titled and Bad Animals and the massive #1 hits, These Dreams and Alone. And the Wilson sisters, they'd earned the right to rock and write their own stuff again. We were excited for the next album. So when Brigade was announced for 1990, expectations were high. But the album, it turned out to be a halfway house. That's the way that Nancy Wilson described it as the record. She said it was a record that didn't know what it was. It was caught between the glossy 80s formula and their burning desire to return to a more authentic rock sound. The Wilson sisters, they were just sick and tired of performing songs written by outside writers, especially when they were great writers. They wanted to wiggle out of the skin, that's what they said. But the label, they had other plans. The most contentious battle came over a song called All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You. Written by super producer Robert John Mutt Lange. Mutt Lange wrote it. It was originally intended for Don Henley, but the track landed in Heart's lap, with Capitol pushing it to be included. Ann Wilson hated it. From the moment she heard it, she loathed it. She's like, what does that even mean? When she went through the first run-through, she just thought the storyline was bizarre. A woman picks up a hitchhiker solely to get pregnant because her partner is infertile. She called the song's concept hideous and felt the band was being force-fed material that went against everything that they stood for.
So we drove for a while.
Now, despite her objection, she reluctantly recorded it, though she later admitted her delivery suffered because she was not at all convinced by the message. The cruel irony is All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You became Heart's biggest hit of the new decade. It went all the way to #2 on the Hot 100, and it went to #1 in multiple countries. But its success came at a steep price. I mean, the song was so controversial it was banned in several countries, and Ann, she grew to despise it, even more so later.
When he saw his own eyes.
When Nancy suggested bringing it back for tour later on, she just couldn't even stomach the first verse in rehearsal. She would say, and I quote, "I can't do this. I'm grossed out by the song." Here's what Ann told me about it.
The thing about All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You is that I'm no prude. I'm not a Victorian woman or a prudish woman about where sexuality is concerned. But when you took those words that were written to be sung by a man about casual sex with a hitchhiker,
I didn't ask him his name.
and you flipped the gender,
Right.
it took on, it was shocking to be sure.
Right.
But For me, it took on a grossness.
A creepiness.
A creepiness. Yeah,
right.
Exactly right.
And I offered him a ride.
Brigade became Heart's third straight multi-platinum album, though. But the stigma of its biggest track overshadowed the joy of its success. There is a recent epilogue to the song, though, as Ann did start doing it again, though some behind the scenes say it's still a stinker and it's still tough for her to get through. But who knows? All right, coming in at number 3, I've got Axl Rose's multi-decade passion project, Chinese Democracy. Now, we covered this a few months back, but I've got a different side of the story for you here. After their bid to conquer the world with Appetite for Destruction in 87 and Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 in 91, Guns N' Roses could have been, should have been, ascending to the heights of rock's Mount Olympus. Instead, the world got the spaghetti incident. And this from the End of Days soundtrack. Now, I'm not taking anything away from what they accomplished as a band. The Guns were massive in their day. But their insane run of rock dominance, it just felt way too fleeting. Am I wrong? Ready to take things to the next level, though. In 1994, the band began gearing up to work on their next album. But then Axl unilaterally axed guitarist Gilby Clarke and brought in his childhood friend Paul Tobias to replace him. Slash was not having it. He was fed up with Axl. He turned to his side project Slash Snakepit. And by October 1996, he was gone altogether. Then Steven Sorum got the boot in 1997, and then Duff McKagan called it quits after that. Just like that, Axl was the last man standing from the Appetite for Destruction days. That whole band was gone. Even still, Axl had big plans for GNR, Chinese Democracy. But what was supposed to be a quick follow-up to The Illusions became a project that entered into the realm of mythology, right? It would be one of the most tortured album creation projects in rock history, even more than Smile from the Beach Boys. 17 years in the making. It was supposed to be huge, bigger than Appetite, bigger than anything that Guns N' Roses had ever done before. To make it happen, Axl became a recluse in the studio, plotting his massive comeback, all the while burning through producers and reportedly spending over $13 million to get it done. The band saw at least 10 guitarists come and go within that time, including Robin Fink, Bumblefoot, the mass virtuoso Buckethead, who wore a KFC bucket on his head, right? And they required a giant chicken coop built in the studio as his personal retreat. So aiming to make the best record ever made, he even brought in Queen's Brian May to the madness. Invited by Axl to contribute a guitar solo to Catcher in the Rye around 1999, Brian May recorded his parts only to have them edited together from several takes without his knowledge. Brian May was reportedly aghast upon hearing the comped version, saying, "That's not what I played." His work was ultimately scrapped entirely. Axl tinkered endlessly, re-recording tracks with new members and incorporating industrial rock and trip-hop textures that felt completely out of step with GNR's brand or their sound. As the years ticked by, the legend grew and the anticipation, it became suffocating. I mean, for years, reports trickled out about the album's progress with managers and labels promising release dates, and they just came and went. It was a disaster. Chinese Democracy, it was a unicorn, a mythical fictional entity that music fans obsessed over and talked about endlessly. Now, when it finally did land on November 23rd, 2008, let's say it didn't at all live up to expectations. Despite debuting at number 3 on the Billboard 200, it took a steep fall after the first week. After word started getting out about how it sounded, especially. The singles didn't make things any better, though. The title track, Chinese Democracy, it made some waves initially. It did hit the top 5 on mainstream rock radio. But let's be honest, nothing stuck at all in the culture like Sweet Child of Mine or November Rain had. Not even close. Radio didn't even get behind the promo singles like Better and Street of Dreams. It was a total mess. Maybe it would have been better as an Axl Rose solo project. Regardless, Chinese Democracy wasn't the GNR album we asked for, and is still a huge thorn in their legacy. Coming in at the bridesmaid position on our countdown, I've got Metallica's 8th studio album, Saint Anger.
Saint anger on my neck.
You knew it was coming. By the turn of the millennium, Metallica was in desperate need of a win. Their 90s albums Load and Reload, while commercially successful, had many metalheads in an uproar. And then Metallica's war with Napster erupted in 2000 in a huge way when an unfinished demo called I Disappear leaked onto the platform before its official Mission Impossible 2 release. And the band came down hard. They sued Napster and they delivered a list of over 335,000 users that they wanted punished. In response, fans torched the band. They called them money-hungry sellouts. Add to that the abrupt departure of bassist Jason Newsted in January 2001, and Metallica, they were on the ropes. But even in the midst of the turmoil, many fans were still psyched for Metallica's next album. So when word spread that the band was finally ready to get to work on their next project, there was a palpable excitement for sure. The recording process, that started in April of 2001 at the Presidio in San Francisco. But it quickly devolved into chaos. And then 3 months into recording, everything went to a halt when James Hetfield entered rehab for substance abuse. The mighty Metallica machine had broken down completely. After months in limbo, Metallica regrouped in 2002 with new boundaries and in therapy, and the cameras were rolling. Of course, the result was that documentary, Some Kind of Monster. We've all seen it.
Being a complete dick. You're really helping matters.
So the band scrapped most of the Presidio takes. They moved into their headquarters and committed to a raw, back-to-basics approach. So by early 2003, Metallica had hammered chaos into something resembling a mission statement. Ugly, honest, and deliberately unpolished. When Saint Anger finally hit shelves on June 5th, 2003, the commercial response was initially positive, actually. The album went straight to number 1 on the Billboard 200, and it topped the charts in like 30 countries. I mean, millions of us fans rushed to drop the needle, so to speak, to hear what our heroes had crafted during those truly turbulent years. But word got out fast. This wasn't the Metallica anyone expected, or wanted for that matter. The band had deliberately stripped their sound down to what producer Bob Rock described as 4 guys in a garage, and for Metallica, that's not a good thing. And James's vocals were raw and untuned. Lars's drums sounded like trash cans. And most shocking of all, there wasn't a single guitar solo on the entire album. Kirk Hammett's signature leads, a cornerstone of Metallica's sound since the beginning, they were MIA. The band felt that adding solos would sound like an afterthought, is what they said. But to us fans, their absence was musical vandalism. The songs themselves were marathon affairs, repetitive and kind of lyrically awkward, reflecting Hetfield's therapy sessions in ways that no one wanted to really hear about. Hetfield himself later admitted the extreme nature of the process, saying, "We went from one extreme to the other, from hating each other to not talking to hugging and crying over every single note. It was crazy, one to the other." The disappointment was crushing, really because the anticipation had been so enormous. After 6 years of waiting, fans expected full-force Metallica. And that's not what we got. Sales quickly tailed off as we, the fans, checked out. By 2007, during the band's Sick of the Studio tour, not a single Saint Anger track was in the set list. But nobody complained, let's be clear. All right, so here we are at number 1. And you know what? This is a tough one. Sadly for this one, I'm penciling in one of my favorite bands ever, the mighty Van Halen. I gotta tell you, it's truly painful for me to say this about my favorite hard rock band ever. Difficult, for sure. The most difficult number 1 I've done. Any guess as to which album? We're going straight to 1998 for this one, Van Halen 3. What can you say about Van Halen by this point? They had conquered the world twice over, two completely different frontmen, first with the acrobatic showmanship of David Lee Roth, then with the powerhouse vocals of Sammy Hagar, the Red Rocker. Each era produced multi-platinum albums and searing rock classics. Van Halen was the juggernaut of the rock arena era. But by the mid-90s, the gears were grinding to a halt. Creative conflicts and frayed communication led to Sammy Hagar leaving the band in 1996. Then Van Halen briefly reunited with Diamond Dave for 2 new tracks and that MTV Video Music Awards showcase there. Okay, we'll get... When the dust settled, though, it was clear the band would need a new frontman. Stepping up to the mic was Extreme's vocalist Gary Cherone. Now, known for his impressive range, Cherone was a proven performer who could handle the demands required of Van Halen, being a frontman of Van Halen. At least that's what I thought when I first heard it.
More than words to show you feel.
I remember the announcement generated some genuine excitement. We were thinking, could this be the beginning of a triumphant third era? Well, unfortunately, no. Hell no. When the album dropped in March of 1998, the excitement quickly turned to complete disappointment and then outright rejection. Van Halen 3 was a mess, and everybody could hear it. The album lacked the concise, hook-driven songwriting that had made the band so legendary. Instead of tight, explosive rockers, fans got long, meandering tracks that just went nowhere. Get this, the production was handled by TV theme writer Mike Post. We talked about him a lot. And as brilliant as he is in the TV realm, the album, it felt sterile and disjointed. The chemistry that had driven their previous successes, it was completely missing. In fact, Eddie Van Halen played most of the bass parts himself, sidelining Michael Anthony. And Anthony's signature backing vocals, which are a crucial element of Van Halen's sound, those were largely absent. I don't know how. The rollout strategy proved equally disastrous. Rather than touring first to let fans warm up to Cherone singing the classic catalog, the band jumped straight into promoting the new material. And that decision backfired big time. Many fans felt hoodwinked, especially after the very public David Lee Roth reunion tease. And they just weren't ready to accept the third singer. I had an open mind about it, but that quickly changed. Said Gary Cherone about it, and I quote, "If I was to do the whole experience over again, I wish I would have gone out and toured with the guys before we made that record. Maybe for the audience, the transition would have been a little smoother." Van Halen 3, that debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200, which is a great number, but that was achieved by the band's reputation alone. Things quickly faltered after that. When all was said and done, the album only certified gold in the US. First time in their long career that they'd failed to achieve at least platinum status. This was Van Halen. The supporting tour was even worse. It struggled with weak ticket sales, some not even halfway sold. Despite the band digging deep into the Roth era cuts, a band accustomed to multi-platinum and diamond success and sold-out arenas, Van Halen 3 was a crushing reality check. It ended their streak of commercial dominance for sure. The album fundamentally altered Van Halen's trajectory, transforming them from hitmakers into kind of a nostalgia act. Not surprisingly, Gary Cherone did not return for his second album. So there it is, the 7 most disappointing albums and singles that I can think of. What are some of yours? What was an album that you were anticipating that you were really frustrated about? And again, all these bands I love, but everybody has a bad patch. So let's have a great discussion about your memories, about your picks. Where did I go right? Where did I go wrong? If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.